Hi guys, this is Teresa Yanaros. Welcome to my channel. Go on down there, hit the subscribe, hit the like, hit the bell, hit all the buttons, do all the things. We are here today with a very special guest. We have Adam Blai, who is a paradist, which means a Catholic Church decreed expert in religious demonology and exorcism. He currently serves the Diocese of Pittsburgh, and he trains priests, deacons, and laity across the world in the ministry of exorcism. He has a master's degree in adult clinical psychology, and he authored Catholic Guide to Miracles and Possession, Exorcism, and Hauntings. And today we're going to talk a little bit about this book, also some other things as well. Thank you so much, Adam, for being here today.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So first of all, I just want to say that I absolutely loved your YouTube series, Deliver Us from Evil. I thought it was extremely well presented and rich with really good information. I personally think it's so important to combat the bad information out there about the dangers of the occult. So first of all, thank you for your work.
Oh, sure. I'm glad it was helpful.
It was very helpful. Yes. So I want to first begin with, what is a miracle and why does God send them to us?
Well, what is a miracle is a kind of a multi-layered question. So at the very basic level, it's just something that only God can do. And at a more subtle level, we would go back to Thomas Aquinas and we would say it's at kind of three levels. So when God does something that nature can never do, that's kind of like the top tier miracle for Thomas. And that would be like the sun dancing in the sky at Fatima, where that just doesn't happen in nature. And if it did, we'd be in a lot of trouble. And then there's when God does something that nature does, but in a different order. And so the example that I always use is Lazarus was dead for 4 days, and then he was raised from the dead, right? So normally we go from living to dead in terms of our physical selves eventually, but to go in the opposite direction doesn't happen in nature. And then the third level for Thomas, kind of like the I wouldn't say the lowest tier of miracle, but the least dramatic of them, is when God does something nature does, but faster. So if you think of a healing from something that's going to pass, like let's say you have a bad cold, you know, it's going to last 4 to 10 days. Somebody prays for you and like at the snap of a finger, it's gone and you're completely fine. That would be something happening much faster than when nature does it. So that's kind of the way Thomas breaks it down, but it essentially is when God does something that we just can't explain.
Thank you. Great explanation. So the next question becomes, why does God send us miracles?
Well, I think you can look at the Gospels and you can look at the way Jesus talked about signs. You know, when he referenced signs, he was pretty clearly referencing the miracles that he was doing. And when you look at the people's reaction to miracles, that's the first clue is, you know, at the synagogue at Capernaum, he went in to preach and somebody fell over in the corner and started growling. And he said, leave him. And that caused a big stir because for the Jews who had exorcists, exorcisms were always done by invoking God and asking God to take care of the problem. And the Jews had an understanding that only God has dominion over these evil spirits. So when Jesus went into the synagogue and just said, leave him, and it left, that was kind of the first thing that started a big stir about Jesus. And what happened is that people started talking about him. So he may have been a good teacher, he may have been, you know, a good scholar of the Torah, but when he did something that people can't do, that's when it started to stir. And that really was the first thing, at least in that gospel account, that was the first event that separated him from people. And they said, who is this that he has the same authority that God does? And so, and then Jesus references, you know, people that seek after a sign and you know, that people are impacted by these signs that he's doing in these healings. So they were proofs of his divinity. And I think for us now, they're a proof of the reality of God in the spiritual that continue to this day. So they're done ultimately for our conversion and for our spiritual benefit. Yes, they benefit the person. So if a person gets healed of cancer, hey, great, that's wonderful for that person. But if the world hears about it, it then impacts tens of thousands or millions of other people. And so that miracle is basically pointing us back to God. And so it's basically the reality of the spiritual, I guess.
I love how you described how a miracle doesn't just impact the person who experienced the miracle directly. Let's say it's just one person that spreads, because that faith will spread. People will see the evidence of God through that. So I love how you added that in. So I loved your book, first of all, and you gave a really cool anecdote, and I would love if you could share that with my audience about the Eucharist that you received at the Mount of Transfiguration. Can you tell us that story? And then maybe tell us a little bit about why Eucharistic miracles are so important.
Sure. So I shared that. I know these things they can cause kind of bad reactions in people where they either think you think you're special, or they start thinking you're special, both of which are, dangerous things. So first off, I'm not holy, I'm not special. I don't make any claims to that at all. But what I experienced, I think, happened as an encouragement for me towards the end of a really rigorous pilgrimage in the Holy Land. And this was like day 5 out of 7. And I had been involved in the exorcism world for a number of years when this happened. And it kind of is a thing that continues to get more intense as the years go on. And so I think it happened as an encouragement for me, and also as a signpost that would be there for the rest of my life, kind of like a tent pole that you can look back on and remember that there was this concrete event that for me, again, so for this miracle for myself, it becomes a valuable moment for the rest of my life to reflect back on that event. But then through sharing the story, the purpose in sharing it isn't to say, oh, look at me, I experienced this. The purpose in sharing it is, here's all these Eucharistic miracles, and people experience these things too, personally. Sometimes, they're not super common, but there's other people that have had very similar experiences. So that's all a preamble to just say, we went up to the Mount of Transfiguration, which is Mount Tabor. And there's an old Crusader church up there that has 3 chapels. The middle one is for Jesus, and there's a side chapel for Moses. I think it's on the left. No, maybe it's on the right. And the other one for Elijah, which goes back to the vision that they saw of Jesus and Moses and Elijah appearing. And so we had Mass in the Moses side. And at the end of Mass, we were all kneeling on the floor and receiving communion, which was great. And, I saw a regular host coming at me like normal, and received on the tongue. And when I closed my mouth, as fast as snapping your fingers, my mouth was filled with fluid to where I was afraid it was going to spill out, but it didn't. And what I felt on my tongue wasn't a round, hard wafer. It was an irregularly shaped, very soft, pliable, felt like it was about this big. So about as long as your tongue, but irregularly shaped and very soft and pliable and fairly thin, something. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, wait, this feels really weird. I've never felt anything like this before. It looked like a regular host. And I kind of looked out of the corner of my eye, and Father had moved on and he was giving communion to other people. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to interrupt their communion by being, this weirdo of like gesturing, like what's going on here. So I thought, I'll just talk to him later. And so it didn't taste strange. I didn't taste anything odd. So I just swallowed, and I talked to Father that evening when I had a moment to talk to him alone. And I just asked him if there was anything odd about the hosts at Mass that day, like were they really soft? Because I figured maybe at this church they make them by hand or something, and they're really soft. Or, but I knew even if it was soft, that wouldn't have accounted for it. And he just smiled and he said, no, they were regular hosts. And he said, you just really received communion. And that was literally all he said about it. So for me, it's been a kind of a moment in life, like, intellectually that the Eucharist is something special, that it's God, that it's Jesus, making himself available to us. But to have that moment, like every time I go to communion, in a sense, that moment is right there in my mind, and it helps me hopefully be a little better interiorly disposed to receive communion reverently and hopefully properly. So yeah, that's what happened.
It's interesting because when you hear people talk about seeing in the spirit, it's like the veil is lifted and they're able to see in the spirit realm. And it sounds to me like what you were experiencing was a form of feeling or sensing in the spirit.
Well, no,
Interesting.
this was very physical. This wasn't in my mind's eye. Like,
Right. And some
yeah.
people who see in the spirit actually see it physically with their physical
Mhm.
eyes. And so it seems to me like complementary to that almost, because it was a physical experience that you had
Mhm.
beyond the veil of what the Eucharist is potentially. You know
Right,
what I'm saying? That's kind of,
right,
it's interesting.
right.
Fascinating.
And so you had asked, like, what are they in general? So the usual pattern with Eucharistic miracles is um, there is either an abrupt or a slow transformation of the host into what turns out through medical examination by outside, they prefer atheist physicians or just highly qualified, like professors of um, medicine that focus on the heart. So they'll often have these samples analyzed without telling the lab or the doctor where they came from or what, their origin is, and they'll just say, well, what is it? And it always turns out to be cardiac tissue. I believe it's AB, don't quote me on this, but I think it's AB positive. It's always the same blood type in all of the miracles that have been studied that I was able to come across. And yeah, so it's either an abrupt or a slow transformation. Sometimes the host will bleed at the altar. Sometimes it will change into a soft, pliable tissue with blood in it. And it seems to be permanent. It doesn't turn back into bread as far as I know. And yeah, so and some of these are on display for generations or hundreds of years. People can go and see them in their transformed state, because I don't think anybody ever consumes them after something odd is happening. They kind of start an investigation to make sure it's not mold or, just some mundane something. But I would say in at least a number of the stories that I was able to uncover, they happened again. The theme in this conversation is for the person and for the world. So the priest may have had doubts about the reality of the Eucharist, and then one of these events happens. And so that's a faith moment for that priest as an individual, but then later the world hears about the miracle and it becomes something valuable to millions of people. And so God kind of does both with them.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Next question is, how do miracles reveal the reality of the new kingdom and that which lies in our future?
Mm. Well, I think if they become a proof for us that the supernatural is real, that God is real and that there's more to life than just our five senses and physics as we understand it. If we think of Teresa of Avila levitating, if we imagine seeing a saint levitating and there's no wires and there's no tricks or mirrors, if we were to see that, that would change your life. If you were sure it wasn't being faked and it wasn't a magician's trick, it would change your life. And then it leads to that future hope that there's more to this than just our bodies. That when we die, it's not just things go dark and it's over, but that there's more to it. And so it becomes a proof of that leads to that hope. At least maybe it's not a certainty, but a great hope, I would say, depending on the type of miracle that you've seen or experienced. So, like, I know a number of people that have died clinically and been revived, and they have similar experiences. And there's a bunch on YouTube, different near-death experience people, and the universal thing I hear from them is they're no longer afraid of death. They all, as far as all the ones I've ever met, they all say they didn't want to come back and they beg God not to come back, because even just that foretaste of heaven, to have that brush with God in that near-death experience, they don't want any part of this world anymore. They just want to go further. So they not only don't fear death, and it's not that they're suicidal, but they, in a sense, long to go home. So I think for us, if we experience a miracle where we just observe it or hear about it, or maybe we experience it a little bit, but we didn't get that taste of heaven, it gives us that hope for heaven. And probably most importantly, it gives us the conversion to try to seek out God's rules and live by them. So, it's one thing in a postmodern sense to say, well, I think I'm a nice person, and so I'm fine. I don't need to go to church. I don't need to go to confession. I don't need to follow the rules. I just self-judge that I'm a nice person, and so I'll be fine. I'll go directly to heaven. That's kind of the postmodern, almost new agey approach to spirituality, which is I'll do whatever I want and then just tell myself I'm okay. But I think when we see miracles, particularly connected with the Catholic Church, hopefully the implication is like, wow, Eucharistic miracle happened at a Catholic Mass. Well, maybe that means some of the rules that Jesus laid out and some of the rules that were laid out in the Old Testament are important for our spiritual well-being. Maybe I should follow them. And so that conversion of life that hopefully happens, that's really the point. So I may hope for heaven, but more importantly, I may realize like, oh, I want to make it. I don't want to just ignore God and the rules and do reckless things to offend him. I want to make it to heaven. And so I would say that'd be like probably the more important part, because this life is a struggle. It's not just, oh, I believe in heaven, so when I die, I'm good to go. Like, it's going to be a struggle from now until I go to that judgment.
Thank you for sharing. I just want to make an observation. Something I really like about your approach in the media realm and with your books and with your talks is that you are very grounded and you have like a no nonsense approach, but you also, I mean, you're in the realm of the supernatural. So you're talking about the supernatural, but you're also bringing that clarity, that groundedness, that vigilance into this space. And so I wanted to ask you, what is one common misconception about miracles that you wish you could dispel once and for all?
Well, gosh, I would probably say an important misconception is a lot of people think that it's only the big dramatic miracles that count or that even happen. Through a lot of priest friends and just life experience, I've known so many people that have been on death's door or slated to, the doctors have given up and sent them home to die. And a priest has prayed with them and given them the anointing of the sick, and maybe a particular saint's been invoked. And there's been a dramatic healing, but they're not all Fatima, they're not all the big dramatic miracles that you hear about. And I think some people sadly kind of feel like, well, these stories are nice and all, but I've never had anything like that in my life. And maybe the implication is I never will, because I'm not, some people, I don't know, they just think it's rare and that it doesn't happen. But my point would be, I think there's thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of little miracles happening all the time through prayer, just through God's grace. And we don't have to think that, oh, God has these few people that he really likes a lot and did these special things for. No, he does special things for us all the time. They're just not always, as dramatic as Teresa of Avila levitating off the floor, but they don't have to be. Even with her in that example, she was embarrassed by it. And she would ask the nuns, hold me down if you see me floating up, because I don't want to embarrass myself in front of Father during Mass. So, don't imagine that it's just the dramatic miracles and that those are the only people that God wants to give those miracles to. He's doing things for us all the time. And I think there's been lots of miracles that have spared a lot of us, and we probably aren't even aware that they happened.
That's a great answer. Why does Mary appear to humanity? Or why do you think?
Well, I think the bottom line is because Jesus wants her to. So, Jesus is God. He's part of the Trinity, and he can do whatever he wants. That's clear. And he loves his mother, and he respects her, and he still loves her. And he has chosen to use her as a mediator for graces into the world. He doesn't need her to do that. He doesn't need anything from anybody, but he chooses to. And if you follow the thread of the Marian apparitions down through time, the approved ones where miracles have happened to substantiate it, and they've been approved by the local bishop and then sometimes by Rome, there's a consistent development of the Marian appreciation or understanding of Mary's role in heaven over time, and where she's even directly said, my son wants the world to know more about me. And it's not that she's being egocentric and saying, you need to pay attention to me. She's saying, my son wants me to do these things and wants the world to ask for my intercession, and if it kind of goes, in a sense, it goes back to Cana, the first miracle with turning the water into wine, in that moment in the gospel where he says, like, woman, this isn't my problem. It's not my time yet. And then there's this pause where she doesn't say, there's nothing written. So, she just looked at him. And then she says, do whatever he says, and walks away. And so in that look, we see that he says, it's not my time yet, but for you, mother, I'll do it, is the message there. So I think this is why in a lot of kind of monastic stories in the ancient church, there's that reference to our sinful nature. We wouldn't make it past our judgment, but she intercedes for us and says, for me, would you save this one? And so, that's something from the ancient church. You still see that story on the wall and icons of Jesus and Mary, and that dialogue at the bottom. This one is too sinful. He's not close to my heart. He's not, with me. And Mary basically saying, but for me, would you please, give him the grace? And he says, he's yours, meaning this person is yours, mother. So she's there because he wants her to be there. And like, for instance, in the exorcisms, 9 times out of 10, at the end of the exorcisms, which is many, many sessions, it's not like in the movies where it's 10 minutes and it's over. At the last one, when the last demon is cast out, 9 times out of 10 or more than that even, Mary's the figure that they see who comes. And that's true of even people that aren't Christian. They don't really know next to anything about Mary. Certainly everybody's heard of Mary and seen images of her because she's in the civilization, in the mind of the civilization. But people have sometimes said, well, this beautiful woman came in the room and she looked at me and she said, it's over. But who was she? And they have no idea who she was because she doesn't introduce herself, but they still see her. And so the Christians and Catholics will say, I figured out who she was really quick because when she looked at me, I knew it was about to be over. And she's the one that comes and Jesus sends her. Now, she usually only comes at the end when the case is finished. And she usually only says, it's over. I've never heard of her saying much more than that to a person, but it's an example of when the supernatural is going to intervene. In the case of exorcisms, which are 7 of the major gospel accounts of miracles are exorcisms. So they were a major part of Jesus's miracles. And he told the church to go do it, go do exorcisms. And when we see it play out, we don't prep the person. We don't say, you're going to see Mary at the end. We don't put that in their mind. We don't even mention it. But it happens over and over and over. So why does he send her? Because he wants to. He chooses to. And yeah, I mean, so many popes have talked about the power of the rosary, the importance of the rosary, the importance of Mary as an intercessor for us. I think Jesus is giving her to us as a mother and an intercessor, and perhaps because she's, in a sense, one kind of notch closer to us as humans. So she was fully human, just without sin, right? So conceived without sin. So, I mean, she's different than us, but she's fully human. Jesus is complicated. He's fully human, but he's fully God. And his mind isn't really like ours in that sense. So we can relate to him. He's more relatable than the Father. Like the Father, how do you imagine the Father, right? Like you go back to Moses and say, like, there's some maybe hints there, but you really can't imagine the Father or the Holy Spirit. How do you picture that? But you can picture Jesus. But Mary, well, she's fully human. She had doubts. She had, all the struggles that we go through. And Jesus had those struggles too. He had his full humanity. But I think in a sense, she's kind of like a figure that's feminine and softer perhaps, and maybe less intimidating than a male figure. So there's a bunch of reasons why he might want her to do that. But the bottom line is he really, that seems to be the situation. And it's not just me being Catholic and saying, oh, you should believe in Mary. At the exorcisms, we just pray that it's over. We don't have a like a desire to be like, oh, I want this to be this saint that'll end it today, or it's not about that. You just want to see that person freed, but
Right.
that's the figure of heaven that comes. So.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. I'd love to ask you just a couple of questions on exorcism while we're here. It is relevant for my channel. I recently interviewed Monsignor Stephen J. Rossetti, and he actually mentioned Mary appearing as well. I think that's really fascinating. So I understand that there's been an increase in the number of people called into the ministry of exorcism, in particular in America, but worldwide. What are your theories on the reason for the increase?
I really do think it's a movement of the Holy Spirit. So little over 15 years ago when I got involved in this, it's hard to say, but there was maybe 20 exorcists in the whole country in the United States. Nobody kept a master list. So Father James LaBarre was kind of the de facto head exorcist for the country at the time. He pretty much knew everybody. And I knew him back then. We worked on the same big case before he passed. And he said it was around 20, but I don't think even he knew for sure, because a lot of bishops in those years kept it secret who the exorcist was or whether they had one. So for a country of over 300 million people, that's not many. And if you think of, I forget how many dioceses there are, over 200 dioceses, I believe, in the United States. So, maybe 20 had exorcists, and a bunch of those were in New York. So there was a bunch in New York. And so there was a lot that didn't have them. Now, the Holy Spirit seems to have brought back the ministry here in the States, at least, over those 15 years. So through the Pope Leo XIII Institute, which trains exorcists, and then we did about 10 years of national conferences in Tulsa that's now moved to Kansas. We've trained a few hundred priests in exorcism. Now, they're not all working in exorcism. Some of them have been assigned to other things, or maybe, some of them got older and they stopped doing it. But there's been a dramatic increase over the last 15 years. Now, I have a friend who's doing a PhD and did a survey of exorcists to gather data from them. Now, it's still in the works. It'll be published hopefully in a couple years, but I'm a reader on it, so I got to see all the data. And when they asked the exorcists that they surveyed from across the country, have you seen an increase in cases in your time in this ministry? It's about 90% of them said yes. And then when they said, like, how much of an increase, most of them said a dramatic increase in the years that they've been involved in this. So even over the last 15 years, there's been a spike in cases. In the 2011 special session on exorcism at the USCCB meeting in Baltimore, I think it was 11, Bishop Paprocki had set it up, and he gave an interview to the New York Times. And the New York Times asked the same question in a different way. They said, well, why are you guys spending time talking about exorcism? Because a lot of the secular world, it's like, well, that's medieval craziness. Why are you taking that seriously? And he basically said, we, meaning he was speaking for the bishops, he said, we're seeing an increase in cases, and so we have to address it. And in talking with bishop friends that I come in contact with around the country, they pretty consistently said the same thing. Some of them have said, I've been a bishop for a long time. We never had any cases, or it was maybe one psychiatric case a year where a person was mentally ill and thought they were possessed. And then, now it's 5 or 10 genuine cases a year. So in just one diocese. So I think the Holy Spirit got us ready. And now we're seeing a big spike in cases, and we see why the Holy Spirit got us ready.
So I want to talk for a moment about the normalization of the occult, which I talk a lot about on my channel. You've mentioned this, actually. You and I have a lot of alignment in talking about this particular issue. You've mentioned the normalization of Wicca and witchcraft, which manipulates a vague, undefined energy. And I want to ask you, in what ways are these practices against the first commandment, and how are they dangerous?
Yeah, so when we try to help people that come to the church and ask for help, so I guess what I'm trying to couch this by saying, I'm not speaking from like I'm going to thump the Bible and tell you shouldn't do this because it's not Christian. I do think that, but I'm speaking from a place of experience. So after after going to exorcisms and working with people, many of which got into trouble through dabbling with witchcraft or Satanism or some form of black magic, there's a consistent pattern that the worst spiritual problems come from those practices. And so it's not like a warning saying like, oh, I have a different philosophy than you and you should listen to me. It's, we're both human beings. I work in this area. I've seen it over and over and over and over. You really should think twice about playing around with spirits that are creatures versus going to God, the creator. And so, and by the way, just, you know, super tiny little nugget version, this idea that Wicca or witchcraft is some ancient pre-Christian religion is basically nonsense. And so the Cliff's Notes version is, and you can look this up later and research it yourself, it's in books of the history of Wicca if they're legitimate. Margaret Murray basically made up a fictitious religion that she imagined may have made the Salem witch trial transcripts make sense. And so she, based on what was said in those transcripts that she was studying, this was back in, I believe, the 20s and 30s, she posited this pre-Christian religion. And it was published in the Encyclopedia Britannica in the article under witchcraft. And it was run for 40 years. And the Encyclopedia Britannica in those decades was the internet. So we have the internet now. Back then, every family had an encyclopedia in the house, and that was basically your library. And so if you were going to write a paper for school, you'd open the encyclopedia, and that's the facts, right? And I even vaguely remember having an encyclopedia when I was little. And so people today, you know, can't imagine this, but because it ran for 40 years, even though her theory was panned in the academic literature and dismissed as made up, because they ran it in the encyclopedia, it became a normal thing in society. It became normalized and it became the truth. And then Gerald Gardner, who mixed her ideas with Freemasonry and Aleister Crowley's black magic in the 70s, he's the one that coined the term Wicca, except it wasn't exactly Wicca for him. He called it witchcraft. He said the people that practice it were Wiccans, but he called it witchcraft. And then from him spun off women that got tired of his wanting to be the head of the group and also be amorous with the ladies and other kind of stuff like that. And that spun off into the more feminist versions of Wicca and witchcraft that were more female-centric. But he was basing a lot of what he did on her stuff, which was made up. And by the way, Encyclopedia Britannica wrote a retraction after 40 years and said, this article shouldn't have been run. It's not true. And, you know, we're sorry. But by then it was too late. And then Gardner got interviews on the BBC that were on BBC International Television, which then the world heard, oh, there's these crazy people in England that actually think they're witches for real. And that led to fascination, and that led to the movies in the 60s. And there was a lot of like witchcraft and Satanism, very campy movies in the 60s, and that really normalized it. And so now people kind of have this new version of it, which is, again, another layer of made up, where they play around with spirits and spells and all this stuff and imagine that it's got this pedigree of being this ancient thing. So anyway, I'm sorry I'm rambling, but it's important.
I don't think you're rambling at all. I really appreciate you talking about these things, because I agree with you that there's so much mis and disinformation out there. And that's one of, like I said before in this interview, I really appreciate that you're doing this in your ministry, because I don't think there's enough of it. So I'm right there with you. I come back from a background of journalism, and I have been researching these spiritual topics for a long, long time. And I agree with you. I think we need to be talking more about this stuff. And especially because of the internet and how things can go viral now, you can lose a handle. You gave a perfect example of how we can lose a handle of information. And then people are widely normalizing something that's very dangerous.
And so, you know, I know it sounds cliche, but the bottom line is with this stuff. And by the way, the demons, when we're praying with people that have gotten possessed through witchcraft or Satanism, particularly with witchcraft, during the sessions, in the midst of things, it's very matter of fact sometimes. And I don't want to get into exorcism too much, but it's fairly common that the demons will make offhanded comments to us in the midst of things along the lines of, do you believe this one fell for it too? Referencing the idea that the demons are, or these powers, sometimes people think it's the power of the universe or whatever. Some people are more honest and think they're demons that they're appealing to. Some people think it's some goddess or holy angel. But anyway, they will make snide comments about the foolishness of people to fall for the idea that the demons are actually under their control. So the bottom line is, these demons, which by the way have been around forever, and every world religion knows there's troublesome deceptive spirits that lie to you and trick you into a relationship. So they're a universal human problem. They will play along with anything. If you make up a new spell, I'm not saying to go do it, they don't care. And they don't care if you open a book written in the year 1200 and use that. It's irrelevant to them. Neither has any power over them or any control whatsoever. They're only interested in your subservience. All they care about is you submit your will to them. And so how do they get there? In the beginning, they may play along with you in order to get you deeper into the debt, kind of like, you watch a movie about the mafia and somebody takes a favor or money from the mob, and now now they owe them a favor, and it just leads to more problems down the road. It's kind of like that. They may play along for a brief time in the beginning, but as soon as you're in spiritual debt to them, it ceases to be about you asking them for what you want, and it starts to be about them telling you what you're going to do and not do. And that goes down the road of isolating you and them becoming more and more bossy and then punishing you for disobedience. And then pretty soon you realize you're in trouble, because no matter how you wiggle your fingers or what you say or the circles you draw on the floor, it has zero impact on them because it never did. So people are basically playing around with the violation of the first commandment with any of these practices. And what's that mean? First commandment essentially says, put God first, love God completely, don't place any other gods before him, small g gods. When you turn to a spirit other than God, and it all boils down to either comfort, information, or power. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for comfort about the afterlife, or comfort about my fears, or I'm looking for information. I want to know the lottery number. I want to know what I should do next. Or power. I want to get the girl. I want to get the promotion. I want that fancy car. I want influence over people. I want to have my will. I want to control the world. When you turn to a spirit other than God for those, you're breaking the first commandment, and you're telling God, I don't trust you. I'm not going to wait on you. I want what I want on my timetable. And so I'm going to go to this other spirit to get it. When you do that, you break your friendship with God. Excuse me, you're in a state of mortal sin, and you've started a relationship with that deceptive spirit. So now you're in a relationship with it, and you've broken your friendship with God, and that's not a good place to be. And then it will draw you further and further down that road until you're so far from God that in the end, they'll be encouraging the person to suicide, to either give into possession or kill themselves. And that's the place where they usually come to the church when they're on the edge of about to really fall off that cliff. And so black magic in general, it is just a violation of the first commandment. It's an appeal to a spirit other than God for something that you want, and or maybe something you don't want, maybe something you want to stop. But the big problem is that you've broken that friendship with the Creator, and you've started a quote unquote friendship, because these things are not your friend with this fallen spirit. And yeah, unfortunately, it's a game that's been working for a long time. A lot of people fall for it. And our culture right now, I think the big problem, or the base of this problem, is that we all have an innate need for spiritual experiences. It's part of the human condition. We're curious about the supernatural. We're curious about spiritual feelings and experiences. We seek it out. And if we don't have it through religion, we're going to go play with ghost hunting or go in the attic with our digital recorder or watch a TV show that's going to claim to teach me about spirits when it's really written by a Hollywood writer who doesn't really know much at all. They're just reading people's websites, interviewing a few people and making up a story. But because it's on a screen, it has that veneer of validity. And now I'm having my conscience informed. And now I say, well, that's how the spiritual world works. I saw it on TV. So religion, Christianity was there to teach us how it worked and what to avoid. And that's why the 10 Commandments were there, the first one being the first for a reason. And as we become less religious, we don't know these rules anymore. And so these false things come along and say, well, I'll offer you power and comfort and pleasure. Easy. Here, you do it. You know, you're the God. You become a God. It all goes back to the Garden of Eden. If you read this book, you can do these things and you'll get what you want. You're the creator. You're in control. And that's a lie. You're not in control. You're moving into bondage, but you won't realize it until it's almost too late. And so that's why I try to talk about this a little bit when I can.
Well, and I think something that's important too, and I'd love to hear you talk on this, is I see a lot of people get in trouble when they say, oh, well, I'm doing white magic. I'm not doing black magic. And so they're doing the same things, but they're calling it something different. Can you speak to that concept for a second?
Yeah. So again, so usually the idea of white magic is, you know, I'm doing a spell for healing versus to hurt somebody, or along those lines, you know, something positive. The problem is that, again, from a Christian perspective, you're still breaking the first commandment. So even if you say, oh, I don't believe in spirits, I just believe that, you know, I hang these crystals and it makes good energy in the room. And, you know, I don't believe there's demons or spirits or any of that, but you're still turning to creation. Even if you say it's a crystal, you're turning to creation. And then on that, you're layering and saying, well, I'm really the God here. I'm in charge of these energies and forces because I'm the one with the special knowledge that you can come and pay $20 to, and I'll give you the crystal, and that'll lead to such and such. And so you're making yourself an idol. You're saying the power's within me, either my knowledge of these rocks or my knowledge of spell work, or I have a gift, you know, which is a really dangerous idea. Though there's real gifts, but the idea of gifts can be dangerous because it can lead to a lot of egoism and whatnot. But you're essentially saying, I'm a little God, and I'm going to be the God of my little world, and I'm going to do things in it's my will be done. So, you know, the Christian perspective, to really simplify it, is thy will be done, right? So when we pray, we don't say, Jesus, go do that. We essentially say, Jesus, please do that if it's your will. And if it's your will is the critical part, because you can't make God do anything, because God sees things from his perspective and knows what's best for us for real, which is not always what we think we want. And if you live long enough, we all experience that. We look back and say, oh, thank God I didn't get what I want, right? Because, man, you know, so we've all been there. So anyway, it doesn't matter whether it's white or black magic, because you're making yourself a God. You're making yourself the center of your religion.
Yep.
And I don't want to be too cheeky about it, but you didn't make the universe. You're not God, right? It's pretty clear we're born, we live a number of decades, and then we die, and then we go to our judgment. We didn't make this world. We didn't make the sun. We didn't, you know, and we don't have magical powers. And so these ideas are dangerous, because the creator that did make all of this wants us to be close with him. And we are pretending that we're the creator by doing those things. So, and again, under it is the demon, whether it's pretending to be nice in the beginning or not. And unfortunately, the fruits will be there sooner or later. So, and I don't mean that to be mean. I'm not like wagging my finger and saying, oh, I know better than everybody, and sooner or later you'll know, you whippersnappers. But I've just seen enough cases where, you know, I've seen the person on their deathbed when they sent them home to pass from cancer, who had done something when they were 18, and she was home on the couch and probably days from death, kind of sleeping and fading in and out a little bit, but in the process of dying. And it said, I did something when I was 18, and it's been with me ever since, and I don't want to die with it. I've seen another woman in her late 60s, and it had been with her for many years. She had messed around with some form of black magic earlier in her life. And what we typically see is that when the person's getting ready to pass, they're no longer of any use to the demon. So let's say the person serves them well and promotes whatever false religion flavor of the week that the demon's promoting. And so the demon has no reason to torture them because they're serving them and they're promoting them and spreading that infection to other people. And so what we typically see is when the demon says, oh, there's no more use for you, you're getting ready to be done, I can't get anything more out of you, they then turn on them and viciously attack them. And that's one of the types of the cases we see, is that they run to the church and say, oh dear God, this thing wasn't my friend after all, please help me. And they often come to the, not often, and yeah, often they try other things. And when these things turn on people, all of your spells or your stuff that's in your books that claims that this will bind it or protect you, or you can appeal to so-and-so, of course, none of that works. And the thing just shows its true colors. And then they're looking for Jesus and his authority. Usually they receive the grace to realize there's help there. So anyway, that's a rambling way to say that it's based on experience. Yeah. I think if you believe the 10 commandments came from God, and I think there's a reasonable argument there that the creator is the creator and we're not the creator, and these spirits running around aren't the creator. If they were, why would they need these anyway? Yeah. So it's a dangerous thing, but I guess some of your viewers, not to like get too fixated on spiritual warfare about it, but pray once in a while just that people receive the grace to realize this stuff is not good for them and what's behind it. Not to like chastise them or, attack them spiritually, but just maybe say a decade of the rosary once in a while for the people that are being lured into black magic, to receive the grace to snap out of it.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll let you share about where people can get in touch with you or buy your media and buy your books. So deliverance, and I think this is a nice way to tie this up. So deliverance of a soul from bondage, I believe, is a miracle granted by the grace of God. And can you tell us about a time that you noticed a radical change in a person after deliverance that called them into a deep desire to follow Christ?
Sure. I mean, what we see in the exorcism world is there's many demons there. It's not just one like in the movies. And typically each week, 1, 2, 3 or more are cast away. And it's like layers of an onion. And as each one goes, its effects on that person go with it. And so a person, I'll give you an example from a real case. It's an ongoing case. The person had been in treatment for over 10 years for dealing with anxiety with a therapist who they liked and liked them and knew them very well, had been doing therapy for a long time. And they had mostly coped and were able to function. And now a little bit later in their life, it's turned out that there's a big spiritual problem. And the 1 week, and this person has weekly therapy sessions, 1 week a particular spirit was cast out during prayer, and they went home and, they felt better and they went home. And I got a call on, I think it was Sunday, from their therapist saying, you need to talk to me about what you did on Friday, meaning you guys, because I'm a layperson, I'm not an exorcist. I assist and train exorcists. So, but the therapist was like, you need to tell me what you did on Friday, because they basically said, like, in my 20 years of experience, there's not a way for a human to go from the psychological state she's been in for all these years to suddenly go from that to what I saw on Saturday when they came in for their session. They're like, it can't, basically it can't happen. Like it's too dramatic of a sincere change. And it wasn't just like, oh, the person was happy for a few hours. This is an experienced therapist who's known them for more than 10 years. And so I kind of explained it, just like I briefly said to you, and my background's in mental health also. So we talked shop about it as best I could and explained it, but that's what we see is there's a dramatic change. As that spirit goes, the weights and the problems that it brought go with it. Now, I'm not saying that anxiety is always a spirit, not at all. I'm not saying that everybody out there that's got, a medical problem, that it's a demon, of course not. Humans just have anxiety. Some people genetically have mental illness. We have medical problems. I'm not saying that at all. But when people have these problems, these things are secondary to those problems, to the demon. So that's just one of many examples. Yeah. And there are sometimes physical problems that vaporize with them when they go also. But yes, deliverance is a miracle. And our understanding in the exorcism world and in the church is that Jesus is the exorcist. He lent his authority to the apostles. The living apostle through succession is the bishop in your diocese. So that bishop still carries Jesus's authority that he gave to the apostles. He then delegates that authority to his priest. And so the priest is acting with the bishop's permission, invoking Jesus's authority. So Jesus is the exorcist. And deliverance comes from Jesus, and it's a miracle that he does, in the sense that, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, it's something that God does that people can't do. So we on our own, believe me, cannot boss around demons. If somebody comes in there into the session who is not a priest with permission from the bishop and tries to even say, sit down, when the person's being ornery and running around or something, the demon always will turn to them and say, who are you? I don't have to listen to you. You have no authority over me. And then we'll prove it and usually jump on the person or do something, ornery. And don't be scared by that. Don't worry about it. But the point is that we as humans, we don't have the authority to deliver people. It's God doing it. And God lent that authority to his church. And that's why in the severe cases, in the possession end of the spectrum, where it's very serious, it's like something out of the Gospels, it takes a Catholic exorcism. And I say that not because, oh, I'm Catholic and everybody else is wrong. I don't mean that. But a lot of other groups and religions, when they come across a serious case, they eventually bring them to the Catholics because, one, I think everybody's seen the movies, and so everybody associates exorcism with Catholics. But we're also kind of the only people that have a formal book and have like codified it and figured it out over centuries about how to do it well. But most importantly, we seem to have the authority to do it. And I think that authority comes from Jesus delegating it. So yes, deliverance is a miracle. Unfortunately, all this stuff is real. It's not make-believe, it's not mental illness. Schizophrenia doesn't make you suddenly fluent in Latin and Greek. Possessed people do things that mental illness can't explain. It's not just simple as rolling around and growling. They know secrets they can't know. There's no explanation for them knowing details about your life or events that they were not present for. They can tell you what saint's relic is in your pocket without you ever taking it out or mentioning anything. They speak every language, even if the person has no training outside of English, and they do it perfectly. And the strength is unbelievable. And they never get tired. It's not an adrenaline rush because 3 hours later, it hasn't slowed down a whit. So unfortunately, it's all real. I think your concern is well-founded that the black magic and the Wicca, the witchcraft is particularly dangerous, and it's being normalized and celebrated now. And unfortunately, a lot of people are getting in trouble by it. So I appreciate what you're trying to do.
Thank you. Well, and I appreciate you too. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And I look forward to our next conversation next month. And I would love it if you would tell my viewers where they can find your book, and any other links or places where you are online that maybe they can go to learn more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so that book, The Catholic Guide to Miracles, you can go to Amazon like any other book. You can also go to Sophia Institute Press. My first book, which is more on the exorcism and deliverance and the stuff we were just talking about, possessions, exorcisms, and hauntings, I believe. You can find that on Amazon, or Emmaus Road, which is Scott Hahn's publishing house out of Steubenville Franciscan University. I have a website for information, religiousdemonology.com. Any videos that you've seen, I didn't post. I don't post anything on YouTube. I don't do social media, but other people have taken a DVD series that I did for educating people and they put it online. So I don't know who has posted those, but I understand they're out there, but I can't stand looking at myself. So I've never gone on YouTube and looked.
Well, thank you for everything that you do, Adam. And everyone, this is Adam Blai. Make sure you go check him out. This book is awesome, and his other book is really good too. And as he said, he is on YouTube, unbeknownst to him, or he didn't put it on there. But that is a series called "Deliver Us from Evil," and I highly recommend it. But again, thank you so much, Adam, for being here, and I look forward to talking to you next month.
All right, thank you. God bless you.
You too.
Thanks.